Well, welcome everybody to, I'm very pleased. I'm Dr. Alex Sévigny. I'm a professor in the Department of Communication Studies and Multimedia and the Capstone course instructor for the MCM program. So I'm very pleased to be here with you today to welcome you to the Capstone defense of Lynn Robles. She will be presenting for the next 25 minutes approximately, give or take. And afterwards, there will be a first two rounds of questions. The first round will start with her supervisor, Professor Dave Scholz. After that, her second reader, Dr. Terry Flynn. And then as chair, I can ask a question if I wish. Once that's through, we have a second round where we go through the same order. At the end of those questions, we then go to the gallery. So folks in the audience, you are welcome and invited to ask a question, leave a comment, express some encouragement, whatever you wish to do during that time. You are welcome to do that, invited to do that. At the end of Caitlin's 25-minute presentation, we will break out. So we'll put everybody in a room very briefly, probably for about 5 minutes, while the committee deliberates. Then the committee will bring you all, I will bring you all back to the main room. So please don't leave. Of course, if you have to leave, we understand, but please don't leave. And then join us for the denouement, the big moment when we announce the results of Caitlin's defense and thesis writing. So without further ado, actually, I will say one thing. Apologies for starting half an hour late. We had a bit of a Zoom disaster, which some kind of Zoom outage that at least I was experiencing as the owner of the broadcast here, and at least the person who is running the broadcast. And so my sincere apologies for the inconvenience, delay, and in particular, my sincere apologies to Caitlin for
it happens.
If it threw you for a loop or caused you any distress, it's on me, entirely on me. Nobody else. So all right, that being said, and I apologize to everybody else as well, and in the audience and in the gallery. All right, now that being out of the way, Caitlin, you have until about 23 minutes past the hour, roughly 24 minutes to do your presentation, and then we'll move on to questions. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to everyone who was online today amidst the chaos bright and early. I'm excited to present my capstone project entitled Canadian Hospital Reputation, the Influence of Doctors, CEOs, and Social Media, Ultimately Impacting Patient Loyalty. I'll walk through the context, methods, the findings across 4 research questions, and the overarching takeaways. Research on Canadian hospital reputation is limited, and most existing work draws on private healthcare systems. In Canada's publicly funded environment, reputation functions less as a competitive differentiator and more as a signal of trust and legitimacy. We lack understanding of how physician and CEO reputations shape hospital reputation in this context and how social media contributes to reputational formation. My research addresses these gaps and examines how reputation ultimately connects to patient loyalty. The literature shows that hospital reputation is a complex and multidimensional concept, particularly within Canada's publicly funded healthcare system. Unlike private healthcare markets, where hospitals compete directly for patients, Canadian hospitals operate with limited market competition. As a result, reputation functions less as a branding tool and more as a signal of trust, legitimacy, and ethical stewardship within the community. Foundational reputation theory helps explain this dynamic. Scholars such as Fombrun define reputation as the overall evaluation stakeholders hold about an organization, built through consistent behavior, transparent leadership, and strong relationships. In healthcare, reputation is shaped not only by clinical outcomes, but also by leadership visibility, communication, patient experience, and media narratives. The literature also highlights the important role of physician reputation. Physicians are often the most visible representatives of hospitals, and patient perceptions of doctors frequently shape perceptions of the hospital itself. Research shows that doctor reputation influences patient trust, satisfaction, and ultimately patient loyalty, while hospital reputation can also strengthen or weaken perceptions of individual physicians. Similarly, CEO and leadership reputation can significantly influence hospital reputation. Leaders act as symbolic representatives of institutional values, and their visibility in media and public discourse can strengthen or damage public trust. Another major theme in the literature is the growing importance of social media and digital communication. Social media allows hospitals to engage directly with the public, monitor sentiment, and shape reputational narratives. At the same time, electronic word of mouth and online patient feedback can amplify both positive and negative perceptions. Finally, the literature consistently links reputation to patient loyalty. Patients who perceive hospitals as trustworthy, competent, and responsive are more likely to return for care, recommend the hospitals to others, and maintain long-term relationships. However, much of this research is based on private healthcare systems. There remains limited qualitative research examining how hospital reputation is understood and managed within Canada's public healthcare context, which this study aims to address. Based on this body of literature, I propose the following hypotheses that doctor, CEO, and hospital social media does influence hospital reputation, and hospital reputation influences patient loyalty. With my research problem, I look to find how and to what extent Canadian hospitals actively evaluate, manage, or measure their reputation, and how this impacts patient loyalty. This study was guided by 4 key research questions, examining how hospital reputation is shaped and how it influences patient loyalty, how physician visibility, credibility, and patient relationships influence hospital reputation, how CEO visibility and public perception shape institutional credibility, how hospital physician and CEO social media activity affects reputation, and how hospital reputation influences patient loyalty, including willingness to return, recommend, or support. This study used data triangulation, drawing on 3 types of evidence to answer the research questions. First, an extensive literature review to examine key concepts. Second, a national online survey of Canadians aged 18 and older, designed to understand what influences perceptions of hospital reputation and patient loyalty. The survey contained 23 questions, responses were anonymous, and participation was voluntary. It was distributed through snowball sampling, primarily through social media and my professional networks. It ran for 8 weeks and collected 110 complete responses. Just over half of respondents had no healthcare work experience, while the remainder had current or past experience in the healthcare sector. Interviews were one-on-one virtual interviews with 3 groups working in Canadian hospitals: healthcare communicators, healthcare leaders, and physicians. Interview participants were recruited using purposive and snowball sampling and were conducted on Microsoft Teams. I then leveraged Microsoft Copilot to support manual analysis for themes once the interview data was cleaned and anonymized. In total, 43 interviews were conducted with 22 healthcare communicators, 12 healthcare leaders, and 9 physicians. 89% of participants were based in Ontario, with others from Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and the Yukon. All healthcare leaders were C-suite executives. All physicians were practicing clinicians, many with leadership roles, and communicators ranged from advisor to executive levels. Hospital reputation in Canada, while widely recognized as important, is not measured through a single standardized metric. I asked interview participants how they interpret or define the measurement of hospital reputation. Healthcare leaders described hospital reputation primarily as trust, patient experience, accessibility, and overall community perception of the organization. They emphasized that reputation is difficult to define and not captured by a single metric. Instead, they look at multiple different indicators. Measurement typically includes patient experience surveys, complaints or patient relations data, media and social media monitoring, market share or philanthropy trends, and occasionally external polling or third-party research. Doctors defined reputation more narrowly as patient perception of care, trust in clinicians, and word of mouth in the community. In their roles, reputation is not formally measured. Instead, it is understood informally through patient feedback, colleague discussions, and referral patterns. Many physicians express skepticism about patient surveys, suggesting they may reflect negativity bias or limited context. Healthcare communicators defined reputation as the public narrative around the hospital, shaped by transparency, trust, and organizational culture. They reported the most structured measurement approaches, including media monitoring platforms, sentiment analysis, social media analytics, and digital engagement metrics, as well as patient satisfaction and communication surveys. Some organizations also reported conducting formal reputation or brand studies through third-party firms, while communicators emphasized the ongoing importance of social listening and stakeholder feedback. Across both the survey and interviews, patient experience with individual physicians emerged as the primary way hospital reputation is formed. Survey results show that 89% of respondents agreed that their experience with the doctor influences how they feel about the hospital overall. This reinforces existing research that positions physicians as the most visible and influential representatives of healthcare institutions. Interview findings strongly supported this pattern. Physicians described how patients often attribute individual clinical experience to the hospital as a whole, frequently referring to the hospital collectively when discussing one-on-one interactions. The survey also revealed an interesting contradiction. While 64% of respondents said they do not actively research individual doctors before receiving care, 82% still agreed that doctor reputation influences hospital reputation. Interview data helps explain this. In Canada's publicly funded healthcare system, patient choice is often limited by geography, referrals, and service availability. As a result, reputational influence often occurs after care is delivered, when patients interpret their experience with a physician as a reflection of the hospital itself. Both the survey and interview data show a clear process of reputational spillover, where trust in individual physicians extends to the hospital as a whole. In the survey, 54% of respondents said they trust hospitals more when they employ highly regarded doctors. Interview participants reinforced this idea, describing physicians as the informal faces of the hospital, even when they do not hold formal leadership roles. A single patient interaction, positive or negative, can shape how patients perceive the entire organization. However, the findings also show a clear asymmetry in reputational impact. Survey respondents were more likely to say negative media coverage about doctors damages their perception of a hospital than that positive coverage improves it. Healthcare leaders and communicators emphasized this even more strongly in interviews, noting that physician misconduct, major clinical incidents, or public controversy can create long-lasting reputational harm for hospitals. Importantly, interviewees stressed that organizational response plays a critical role in shaping reputational outcomes. Transparency, accountability, and visible leadership during crises were seen as more influential than the incident itself in determining whether reputational damage spreads institutionally. Survey and interview data showed that CEO reputation shapes hospital reputation primarily through perceptions of leadership competence, stability, and organizational culture. A strong majority of survey respondents reported greater confidence in hospitals, highlighting that CEO reputation functions symbolically and systemically, unlike physician reputation, which is experiential and relational. Interestingly, most patients do not actively research hospital leadership before seeking care. CEO reputation draws attention mainly after crises, controversies, or media attention. Negative events disproportionately affect perception. 87% of respondents agreed that scandals or leadership missteps harm hospital reputation, whereas positive leadership visibility rarely boosts reputation independently. Interviews reinforce that poor leadership decisions or perceived mismanagement can rapidly erode trust, while strong CEO reputation primarily reinforces credibility. Healthcare leaders highlighted the importance of the tone at the top, showing that CEO reputation works through organizational culture, staff morale, and internal consistency. Patients may rarely encounter CEOs directly, but leadership decisions influence staffing, resource allocation, and as a result, overall patient experience. Visibility alone is insufficient. Strategic transparency matters more. Executives must be seen and accountable, particularly during crises, but overexposure or performative communication risks reputational fatigue. Social media is increasingly central to hospital reputation management, but its impact depends on how platforms are used and what content is shared. Survey data shows that under half of respondents follow hospital accounts, mostly on Instagram and LinkedIn, with much lower engagement on Facebook and X. Patients primarily seek practical, service-oriented content, news, clinic updates, public health guidance, and emergency alerts, suggesting that social media builds reputation by demonstrating competence and usefulness rather than promoting the brand. Interviews show that communicators treat social media as both a branding tool and a risk environment, requiring structured governance, continuous monitoring, and evaluation beyond basic metrics. Sentiment, tone, and cross-channel spillover, like media inquiries or stakeholder escalations, matter more than reach or impressions alone. Interviews revealed that content featuring physicians or frontline staff drove the highest engagement and credibility, reinforcing the link between doctor reputation and hospital reputation. Patient stories and staff recognition also ranked highly, highlighting social media's power to humanize hospitals, communicate values, and strengthen trust. Across both survey and interview data, social media was not a primary factor in deciding where patients seek care. Yet, it plays a meaningful role in shaping perceptions of hospitals. Social media functions less as a choice driver and more as a reputational infrastructure, signaling timeliness, transparency, and trustworthiness while amplifying third-party experiences. Survey data shows that nearly half of respondents feel a hospital's online communication affects their perception, and 43% say timely updates increase trust. Interviews reinforce that social media does not replace lived experiences or clinical quality, but it shapes how those experiences are interpreted. Leaders and communicators emphasize that silence allows others to define the narrative, while patient stories, family testimonials, and organic amplification carry the most credibility. A clear pattern across survey and interview data is reputational asymmetry on social media. Negative content impacts perceptions far more than positive content. In the survey, 28% of respondents reported that something they saw online negatively changed their opinion of a hospital, while only 11% reported a positive shift. Interviews reinforce this, with leaders, communicators, and doctors highlighting the rapid spread of misinformation, incomplete narratives, and emotionally charged social posts as major risks. However, doctors tended to downplay its direct impact, noting that clinical encounters remain the primary driver of reputation. This aligns with the literature on electronic word of mouth, which shows that online discourse is especially persuasive because it appears organic and peer-driven. It also underscores that reputational conversations happen whether hospitals participate or not, meaning that silence can carry significant risk. Social media magnifies reputational vulnerability, making proactive engagement and careful narrative management critical for hospitals. Survey and interview data showed that reputation shapes loyalty, primarily through patient experience, trust, and perceived specialty excellence, while word of mouth and public reputation influence expectations and interpretation of care. Nearly all respondents reported they are more likely to return to a hospital after a positive experience and prefer to return to the same hospital. Reputation also guides confidence. 92% felt more confident in hospitals with a positive public reputation, and 88% said personal experience drives reputation. Even with limited choice, patients make reputation-informed decisions for specialized care. 91% prioritize hospitals known for excellence, and 81% would travel further for better reputation. Recommendation behavior reflects this dynamic. 85% said they would recommend a hospital they trust, and interviews highlighted how loyal patients often defend hospitals publicly, amplifying positive narratives. However, loyalty is fragile. 58% said they might choose a different hospital if reputation declines, highlighting the asymmetric weight of negative information in shaping trust and behavior. Interview findings add nuance to the survey results, showing that Canadian hospitals rarely measure loyalty directly and often question whether loyalty is the right term. Leaders described loyalty using proxy indicators such as repeat program use, patient leakage, willingness to return, community trust, and philanthropy. One physician explained that donations signaled trust and confidence in care, reflecting patients' commitment to hospitals they believe provide the best care. Doctors frame loyalty through trust and continuity, noting that patients often accept longer traveler wait times because of confidence in care, which also improves care quality by strengthening information flow and decision-making. Across all roles, trust emerged as a central mechanism linking reputation to loyalty. Philanthropy and advocacy were highlighted as visible expressions of loyalty, especially where repeat utilization is limited. Voluntary engagement, donations, foundation participation, or public support signals attitudinal commitment and identification with the hospital. In publicly funded systems, these behaviors show that hospital reputation shapes loyalty not only through return visits or recommendations, but also by motivating patients and community members to actively invest in the hospital's mission. A clear theme across all stakeholders is that patient experience is the strongest driver of hospital reputation, which in turn shapes loyalty by influencing confidence and willingness to engage. Leaders, doctors, and communicators emphasized interpersonal care, dignity, compassion, respectful communication, and feeling listened to as foundational for reputation. Operational realities such as emergency department wait times and access challenges also carry significant reputational weight, showing that loyalty depends not just on clinical quality, but on whether patients perceive the system as reliable, humane, and navigable. So what does this all mean? 4 key findings emerged. First, doctor reputation strongly influences hospital reputation, but in a contextual and asymmetric way. Patients overwhelmingly connect their experience with an individual physician to their perception of the hospital as a whole. Nearly 9 in 10 survey respondents agreed that their experience with the doctor shapes how they feel about the hospital. However, in Canada's publicly funded system, patients rarely select hospitals based on researching doctors beforehand. Instead, physician reputation shapes hospital reputation retrospectively through lived experience. Trust transfers from the doctor to the hospital. Importantly, negative physician behavior has a disproportionately larger reputational impact than positive visibility, and organizational response plays a critical moderating role. Second, CEO reputation matters differently. It is less relational and more symbolic. Patients do not typically research CEOs before receiving care, but leadership reputation becomes striking during crises, controversies, or perceived mismanagement. Survey respondents indicated that leadership scandals negatively affect their perception of a hospital. Interviews reinforced that CEO reputation functions as a proxy for governance, accountability, and institutional competence, especially in moments of scrutiny. Third, social media acts as a reputational amplifier, not a primary driver of care choice. Most respondents do not select hospitals based on social media presence, yet nearly half reported that online communication affects their perception of reputation. Social media reinforces transparency, timeliness, and credibility, but it is also asymmetric. Negative content spreads more easily than positive messaging, particularly when amplified through third-party voices or electronic word of mouth. Finally, reputation meaningfully influences patient loyalty, but loyalty in the Canadian hospital context is not transactional. It is trust-based. Loyalty is expressed through willingness to return, recommendation behavior, advocacy, and philanthropy, rather than repeat consumer choice. Patient experience is the foundational driver. Experience shapes reputation, reputation shapes trust, and trust shapes loyalty intentions. Taken together, these findings show that hospital reputation in Canada is relational, experience-driven, and vulnerable to asymmetry, and that effective reputation management requires multi-stakeholder alignment across clinical care, leadership behavior, and strategic communication. So this study contributes to existing research in 3 ways. Reputation is relational, built over time, and especially vulnerable to negative experiences. It extends the loyalty theory in publicly funded healthcare. Defining loyalty as trust, advocacy, continuity, and philanthropy rather than repeat use alone. While leaders, physicians, and communicators understand reputation differently, their roles are closely connected in practice. This study also had several limitations. Data collection and analysis were conducted by a single researcher, so independent verification was not possible. The survey used convenience and purposive sampling with a small sample size of 110, limiting generalizability across Canada. Interviews reflected the perspectives of available participants, mostly from Ontario, rather than all provinces and territories. Future research could explore several directions to deepen understanding of hospital reputation in Canada. One area is whether CEOs with clinical backgrounds are perceived differently from non-clinical CEOs, and how this affects trust and reputation, particularly during crises. Research could also focus on hospital type, comparing community, urban, and academic hospitals to see how each size, location, and patient choice in those regions shape reputational dynamics. Finally, research could examine the connection between hospital brand recognition and foundation branding, given the important role of philanthropy in Canadian healthcare. In the Canadian hospital context, philanthropy and word-of-mouth advocacy emerged as key expressions of patient loyalty, particularly where repeat care is limited by geography or service availability. Across all research questions, patient experience was the foundation of hospital reputation. Interpersonal interactions, communication, and perceived compassion mattered more than technical measures or branding. Research question 1 showed that doctor reputation strongly shapes hospital reputation through direct patient interactions and trust transfer. Negative physician behavior has a longer lasting impact than positive actions, while communications team help manage risk and amplify credibility. Research question 2 demonstrated that CEO reputation influences hospital reputation differently, signaling governance, accountability, and competence. Leadership behavior is most visible during crises, and negative actions can significantly undermine trust. The third research question revealed that social media indirectly shapes reputation by reinforcing transparency, responsiveness, and narrative presence. It amplifies existing perceptions with patient stories and third-party content carrying more weight than institutional messaging. And finally, the fourth research question confirmed that hospital reputation drives loyalty, understood as trust, confidence, advocacy, and willingness to return or support the hospital, including through philanthropy, rather than repeat utilization alone. And just before we get to questions, there are a lot of thank yous to go around. This presentation was just the tip of the iceberg after 2.5 years of learning in this wonderful program. First, thank you to Dave for shepherding me through this process so patiently. I feel incredibly fortunate to have you as my supervisor. Thank you to Dr. Terry Flynn, not only as my second reader, but for encouraging me to apply when I reached out. thank you to the MCM faculty, especially Chair Alex, who's chairing today, for leading us through this capstone course. Thank you to my cohort, MCM 17. What a group of incredibly intelligent and kind people. It's been a privilege to laugh and cry together. And I would like to thank my research participants for their enthusiasm and trust with their experience and candor. And my most important thank you goes to my family and friends, my fiance Justin, my parents, and my friends who have inspired me to take this on, cheered for me, and fueled me with support to keep going through this marathon of a program. And now I'm happy to take questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Caitlin, for a thoughtful and very well presented piece of research. Without further ado, I turn it over to your supervisor, Professor Scholz, for the first question.
Thanks, Alex. That was great, Caitlin, and it was a pleasure to work with you over the past 6 months as well, and in the course that you took over the MCM course. So Canadian hospitals often fall into this, a victim of culture wars, where we hear about America versus Canadian systems, and the Canadian systems are poor quality, long wait lines, which all kind of eats away at reputation. How does a hospital work within that context of building their reputation when what we read before we go is to expect mediocrity compared to other systems?
Yeah, thanks, Dave, for your question. I think a lot of, because it's a non-competitive environment in a way, how would I advise hospitals to make them stand out? You know, there was a survey data that I wasn't able to share in the presentation, and I had asked respondents what sort of hospital specialty do they associate with having the strongest reputation in their region or province? And what overwhelmingly came out on top was specialties like oncology, so cancer care, cardiology, heart health, and pediatrics, children's health. And so I think leaning into your specialty and what makes you stand out, and I think you know, the doctors and specialists in those programs leverage that. I think, you know, wait times are an unfortunate, but probably the most common interaction for folks with a hospital in terms of emergency. But leaning into those specialties and reputation enhancers, I think, is what I would recommend in that sense.
Oh, excellent. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
Terry?
Usually you can ask two or three questions.
Well, I'm going to come back around on
Okay.
I
got lots. I have lots. And not to worry, Kate. I don't have lots in that perspective. But let me just congratulate you. I think this is a terrific capstone. And all I can think about is like, how do we get this information into the healthcare community? Are you presenting at Tassin at all?
I submitted my abstract.
Okay. Did they get back to you yet?
They said they'll have a decision next week.
Okay. So we can push that because we're a big sponsor there and we're going to be there. And so I think this is a perfect example. 300 communicators are going to be in Toronto in April. And this is a perfect place to share this knowledge because I think it's a fabulous study. You hit triangulation, you've got good response numbers on your survey, you have great response numbers in terms of interviews that you did. You really kind of tore apart this, or not tore apart, but really kind of investigate this notion of loyalty and how it goes across the many different functions. And I like what you just talked about in terms of how you can use that loyalty for really enhancing reputation. And especially in those kind of unique areas where, hospitals can do that. And I think, Dave's question is about the US. You get to be a certain age and you start to watch certain different influencers because certain health issues come up in your lives. And yeah, you look at, I remember I watched somewhere and said, you have this condition, go to where the best is.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't you got to have a heart valve replaced. Don't go to the person that does 2, go to the person that does 2,000, right? So that reputation really kind of sings because people are especially attuned in healthcare issues when it's their own, right? And I'm not, it's not going to my corner mechanic. I'm going to somebody that hopefully is going to save my life. So well done on all of those things. The one area that I really want to talk about is this whole social media paradox, right?
Mhm.
Where you've identified this notion that, they do get their information from some social, but it doesn't have that level of impact. So maybe just talk to me about that more, because obviously there's a pressure from leadership. Let's get our stuff out there, right? But
Mhm.
people, they don't really trust it. So
Yeah. I think what was a really interesting thing that came out of my results and why I suggested it for future research was that when I spoke to communicators about their social media engagement, communicators that worked in smaller community hospitals spoke about way higher engagement with their communities. And maybe that's because they said, in this town, in this region, we are the largest employer. So we know that, you know, half of our followers are also our workforce, or everyone in the town is connected in a way to someone who works at this hospital. So their engagement is really high, like that, where I said that people become advocates, and that quote there that I had included where someone said, often we find people defending us online because like that's how strong our reputation. Someone will post something, I had a bad experience, and they said there will be a bunch of comments that say, well, our experience was this, or, you have to be more patient because like the staff are working hard. And I don't know that there's that same level of engagement in more urban areas where you have multiple hospitals to go to. Because if a patient shares a negative experience, well, there's probably another hospital 15 minutes away that they can go to, or 30 minutes away.
mhm.
So I think the social media piece is really interesting. I had asked, physicians and leaders to what extent like they work with their communications team to leverage their personal reputations on social media. And it was, maybe it was my sample size. It was a smaller bag there. Not a lot of people um, are tapped in that way with the comms team. So uh, yeah, to answer your question, I think there's a lot more to be explored with social media, and I think it would probably be more successful analyzing with that regional perspective or lens, because based on my preliminary research, it's so vastly different based on the region.
Okay, I'm going to sneak in another question before Alex, and it's not methodology, so he can work on that. But this, one of the things I think we have to be careful about in this, and you mentioned it briefly, that the majority of the responses come from area. So even the title of your
Yeah.
capstone might need to be reframed to more Ontario centric rather than Canada centric. But that's a small point. The real point is we've seen lots of CEO scandals and crises in Ontario
Mhm.
over the last number of years, right?
Mhm.
Um, in Hamilton, in Niagara, in London, elsewhere as well. So, how do you reconcile the CEO's need for strategic visibility with the risk of overexposure
Mhm.
that could, in fact, lead to reputation fatigue?
Yeah, I think so. What was interesting in part of that social media conversation too, that was region based, it seems there's a lot more CEO recognition in the smaller communities. I spoke to one communicator that said their CEO has a monthly standing interview with the news or the radio show. And so that's very interesting to me because when I spoke to more urban hospitals or teaching hospitals, a lot of them said like people don't know who our CEO is. Like we really try to leverage our specialists, and that's where it comes to doctors. And I think you're kind of seeing that, uh, you know, people are able to separate from sentiment. What I'm seeing online anecdotally is that it seems people are able to separate the CEO from the hospital and recognize that um, that's a management aspect and separate from care. But I think when it comes to physician scandals, that's harder to separate because patients directly interact with physicians in any capacity, whether you're going to a specialist or just the emergency room every day. So I do agree that you have to use your CEO strategically because of that overexposure risk. But I would be really interested to learn more in the smaller hospital regions what people's what the community's perception of the CEO is.
Mhm. Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, you're on
Alex, your
mute,
turn.
Alex.
Yeah. Good morning. I've I will reserve my questions until the end of the second round.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go with one more then. It's a follow-up on Terry's question. I just wanted to
Mhm.
leave you, Terry, with all the potential to ask everything you wanted to ask about reputation. You touch on it in your results,
Mhm.
but I just want to explore it a little bit more. And it's about CEOs still, especially in an urban center. You talk about its CEOs aren't really driving community reputation to
Mhm.
that way, but it's more about the people who work at the hospitals
Mhm.
views. Did you, in your interviews with the physicians or the communications leaders, did they talk about their CEO as being inspirational or part of the reputation, as opposed to just the CEO saying, "Well, I'm important for the people who work here"? Like, did you hear it from the other side as well, that part of their view of the hospital's reputation was based on the CEO?
Yeah, I did actually. There were a few doctors that I spoke with, and I think this is where I made that distinction for future recommendations about clinical versus non-clinical CEOs, where, these physicians spoke highly of their CEO because the CEOs they were referring to were also physicians. And so they said, they came here, they brought great experience, they have a great reputation they brought with them. So I was excited and I will say that these physicians were um, higher up in terms of their leadership level. So they would work more closely with the CEO than just a practicing clinician. These ones had leadership roles, and they spoke highly about their CEOs, bringing a strong reputation, bringing clinical experience. Um, and there was also on the flip side, there is sometimes some one or two physicians that said, uh, they don't understand what it's like to work here in the ED. Um, and when they make funding or resource decisions. And so um, that's what I think is really interesting for future research would be to explore perhaps more internal reputation actually of the CEOs with clinical backgrounds and non-clinical backgrounds.
So based on what you've seen, would you say it's best for a hospital to hire a CEO with clinical background as opposed to a CEO who's good at fundraising?
I don't think I have enough data to support that statement, Dave, but
Okay,
I I think it would be really interesting to explore.
okay,
Yeah,
good answer. Thank you.
thank you.
Note to everybody else that will be presenting capstones in the future. That's a really good answer. I don't have enough data to answer that, but that's something that somebody else can explore. Well done,
Well,
Kate. Good job.
I, I'm very proud because I coached her on that, Terry, in case you
Mhm.
asked her a difficult question she
Well,
couldn't answer. And it turns out it
well
was that
done.
the one that asked the question.
Yeah,
I,
Dave, what the heck?
I love that. Well done. I just want to sort of go back on the CEO stuff for a second. And in your paper, you talk about where the CEOs are located
Mhm.
provincially, and that's okay. Um, can- are you able to share in terms of gender mix on CEOs?
Um, Off the top of my head, it was almost 50-50,
Okay.
which is really interesting. That wasn't purposeful in terms of,
Hmm.
it was more about availability, but uh yes, gender for CEOs was almost 50-50. I would have to go back to confirm. Physicians was all male.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to focus on CEOs.
Yeah, yeah.
So can you talk to any differences in terms of leadership styles or behaviors based on that 50-50 split?
I actually found more differences in leadership style, in my opinion, based on whether they were clinical or non-clinical and how they
Okay.
approached their responses,
Okay.
especially when it came to um, just the general. A lot of them, all of them emphasize patient experience, but the clinical ones uh, talked more in depth um, about the clinical side of reputation. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, this sort of $64 million question here. How will this research help anybody that's in the Ontario healthcare industry to advance the reputation of their hospitals, um, uh, period?
Yeah. Thanks, Terry. I think, well, obviously, I don't think there's enough data to support strong recommendations at this time, and that's why I didn't um, include recommendations in my slide, just due to the limited number of survey responses and interviews. And like you said, it was mostly Ontario. I think what it came down to, and someone had an interesting quote. They said, for such a quantitative industry, it's very interesting that we don't have standardized quantitative metrics for reputation and loyalty across the board. Because everything like quality improvement in terms of the patient experience side is very standardized. Time to inpatient bed, wait times, all of that is measured, but we don't share a standard reputation metric. There's the top hospital rankings, but that's that's not standardized for us. Like, we don't have
Right.
a metric that I can talk to another communicator at a hospital and say, what's your reputation score? What's your loyalty score? And I think ultimately what comes down to is, and I know this was mentioned by another MCM or Amber, is measurement. Like, do we have to come together and decide on a measurement metric? You can see everyone in those Venn diagrams I shared, everyone's saying the same things, just calling them different things.
Mhm.
Um, so, and I think also what someone said in an interview is, sometimes, a lot of times, because resources are so limited, and we're aware of this with budget cuts right now, um, people don't have the resources to measure their reputation. Not every hospital has the resources to hire a third-party firm to do a reputation measurement. And sometimes people don't do that until they're in a crisis. So they don't have a baseline to compare to. So I think maybe just getting everyone on the same page about the importance of measuring at the baseline and evaluating what that um, is probably what I would recommend first.
But that's a failure not of the healthcare system, of the communications industry, right? I mean, that ties back to what Amber has talked about. Also ties back to what Brady Wood did his capstone on years and years ago as well. So, shame on us, shame on this industry. Resources are subjective in terms of what is based on priority, right? And so if you don't believe it's a priority measure, or to have those kind of standardization, or to be seen be at the same level of other um, disciplines within healthcare, then shame on us. But thanks for the answers.
Thanks.
Actually, I just had actually Terry kind of stole my thunder. I was going to ask a very similar question to the last one that he asked, but I'll just follow on to that. Um, what I hear quite often when I speak to healthcare communicators in particular is they don't have the free cycles, they don't have the time or the expertise to do effective measurement, right? But now there's this magical tool that we learned about in our data science class and others, which is automation, right? And in particular the large language models, right? I mean, I wonder if that's going to have an impact. right? And if because all of a sudden quantification is really available and not that hard, right? So I don't know. Do you, this wasn't part of your study, but I'm just asking you to speculate, right? As a sort of extrapolation from your study and from your personal experience.
On whether language learning models could be used for reputation measurement?
Yeah, whether they're going to get communicators to finally do reputation management, having AI basically.
Yeah, I think that actually is like Valerie's capstone basically about AI adoption in healthcare.
Yeah.
So I'll be very interested to see her results. I think it's in terms of speculation, no one brought up um, AI in my interviews, and I think just anecdotally, I think there's still some resistance because right now the conversation I'm seeing is only about what AI can do on the writing scale and the creative scale. That's the conversation that I'm seeing
Yeah.
about, what is AI actually doing for the day to day? And I think we're not yet at the level where people are comfortable talking about it on the bigger scale. Like some hospitals are still rolling out basic AI policies. So to even get to that conversation um about how we can leverage it for a bigger picture like that, that's I foresee a lot of conversations with the CTOs at that level um, and communicators as well, because I can say that on the tech front for direct patient care, there's a lot of innovation and investment that um, that hospitals are quick to jump on, but sometimes on the corporate side, adoption of technology is a lot slower in
Yeah.
healthcare. Yeah.
I completely agree with you. What a thoughtful way of putting it. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is a high speed boat that's going, and communicators better get on board.
Yeah.
You know,
Agree.
Terry and I actually, with Martin, have a piece that may come out in the next while. If it,
Well, and it's also part of our TASN panel
yeah,
that we're talking about that as well, leveraging as well.
true. Last question, Caitlin, very quickly, because I just want everybody to hear it. What are you going to do with this research? How are you going to mobilize it? How are you going to bring it out to the world? Because we don't want it to just sit on your shelf. So much
Well,
effort.
I think hopefully if my abstract is accepted to TASN, I'd like to share it with that group of communicators. I know that the reason why I was able to get such a high interview participation rate was because so many people, once I reached out, they were all curious about where this would lead to. So I think it's identified a clear gap. Um, so I'd love to share this research. Hopefully, TASN's the start, and then
Good.
we'll see where it goes from there.
Very good. Yeah, make sure you do. This is it's really great work.
Thank you.
Congrats on that. Okay, now I open it to the floor, gallery. Questions, comments, encouragements. Somebody's got to have a question. We've had silence for like the last. We used to have such a thriving conversation in this gallery board. It's Christina stepping up. All right.
You know me, I cave into the silence. I can't handle it. So always. It was fantastic, Caitlin.
Thank
I
you.
don't have experience in the healthcare, and the more we study it in our MCM program, I realize it just there's just so much so complicated of a space. I don't really have a question, but I have a comment. Like what struck me is I don't think about loyalty with a hospital. I feel loyalty comes with choice, and I don't always feel like I have a choice. Your
Yeah.
doctor says this is your specialist you're going to, and you go, and you sometimes luck out. Like when my sister had her knee surgery, I lucked out. I got, I can't remember his name now, but he's the well-known knee surgery guy. So I don't always feel like we have choice. So I find it an interesting concept around loyalty, because to me, loyalty requires choice.
Yes. So
Maybe
that
we
was
do have choice. I just don't feel like we activate it. It's a
yeah, of
publicly
course.
funded system like they do, which is different than Terry mentioned in the US.
Of course. And that was the number one comment about whether it was an interview participant or just people who have completed my survey saying, "Oh, that's so interesting. where do you get the concept of loyalty? Well, we have nothing else to call it here because all the research that existed calls it loyalty, and all the research that existed was based in the US and not a lot available on, our public healthcare system. So that's why I had to bring this, and that's why I put loyalty in quotations sometimes, because just figuring out what do we call it then. So I think, and that's where I would also recommend, and because this is foundational research for that gap, that's where I would investigate more about what loyalty looks like in those more rural settings versus urban settings. Like a lot of in the urban areas, people feel like they have choice because there's multiple hospitals. And yes, you're right. In community hospitals, they don't have that same access, or they have to choose. When I spoke to some folks that worked at, let's say, the nearest large hospital to a collection of smaller communities, they view loyalty as, sometimes like that, like they're the only hospital offering that specialized service, or they recognize that patients have chosen to drive or travel a longer distance to them rather than attend their nearest specialist. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's very interesting that you say that, Christine, because so I think in the survey too, like some people research doctors and their specialists and perhaps request a referral to a certain specialist, and some people don't. And I think there's more to be explored there, but it's hard to track in our system in the way we operate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would think if we move to a hybrid private-public, communications is going to become even more important in our public health system because they're going to be competing for headcount of patients, which drives their revenue, right? Thank you. It was excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, for breaking the silence, the many capstone silence, and asking a question. So I feel like we need to send you flowers or something, from the program. But okay, any other questions or comments from the gallery? Okay, then what I will do is I'm going to put everybody in a breakout room while the committee deliberates, and we will, please do stay. We'll be back very shortly, and we will have the results. So I'm going to open the rooms.